Welcome to Bloomberg Law on Demand. I'm Pacchia. Next month, many of the Dodd-Frank Act's provisions are scheduled to automatically go into effect. With Wall Street preparing to deal with this new regulatory landscape, we're now joined by Steve Lofchie. He's the co-chair of the Financial Services Department at Cadwalader. Steve, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Good to see you. We are coming up on something of a deadline. July 16th, some parts of Dodd-Frank are going to remain in the rulemaking period, and others are going to be automatically foisted upon Wall Street. Which provisions are automatic and problematic, in your opinion?
Well, let me say, to begin with, we're coming up with a deadline that we're really not ready for. And it really isn't just problematic for Wall Street. I think there's too much made of the Wall Street and Main Street division.
It's often considered the Wall Street Regulation Act, but
it is. It really affects the Main Street economy. And to give you a sense, part of what is potentially included in the definition of a swap, which is regulated under these laws, is home heating oil contracts if they have a cap on them. So we're not talking about just a Wall Street problem. We're really talking about a Main Street issue. So what goes into effect is it is illegal to enter into a swap without being a swap dealer, without being a registered swap dealer. Mm-hmm. But there is no way to register. So as you go a month and a half to go and you have an illegality and no way to cure it, then that obviously becomes worrisome. It's illegal even to enter into a swap with, I'll say, a non-institutional investor. There's a defined term for it, an eligible contract participant. And that's what makes it very worrisome that this hits Main Street as well.
Mm-hmm. So these financial products are ubiquitous these days. Swaps are kind of integral to the way our economy functions. What's going to happen, in your opinion, on July 16th? Are we going to see a halt in the system? How is this going to get fixed?
I don't know that we will see a halt in the system. I think we will see, I'm fearful we're going to see a real slowdown in the system. I don't think there is any way, I'm going to say, to really fix it other than legislative action. There are things that the regulators can do to mitigate it, to make it less bad.
Can they just extend the deadline?
Congress can. I think there are some things that the regulators can do to delay some parts of it. But there are provisions of it that are really just entirely self-executing and that I think are somewhat outside the control of the regulators.
Did anyone see this coming? I mean, why is this? I mean, we're coming up on July 16th pretty quickly. That's less than a month away at this point. How did we get to this point?
Well, I think, realistically, we might have seen it coming a year ago in the sense that the statute is simply too big to be enacted in a year. Whatever you might think about Dodd-Frank, good or bad, and I confess I'm someone who sees a fair amount of bad in it, it is simply too big. So I think day one we might realistically have said, no way this gets done in a year. And I think as we come up on a year, I don't think we're halfway there.
Mm-hmm. So what's the Steve Lofchie prescription, if you will? We're at this point that we're at now. What's the best course of action? What would you recommend the government to do?
Well, you would love to see the legislature extend the deadline. I think they're really the only people that I'll say can fix the deadline problem. Assuming that the legislature is not going to fix the deadline problem, I think the regulators really need to turn their focus not so much to trying to turn out rules, because they're not going to make the deadline on rulemaking. I think they really need to turn their focus to telling everyone, not just on Wall Street, but on Main Street too, what happens July 16th? What are the rules? How do you feel confident that markets continue, that contracts continue to be enforceable? For market participants, it's all about contingency planning. We have a law that probably doesn't work as it's written. We don't have a set of rules, so there's a lot of uncertainty. What you have to do as a market participant is plan for those uncertainties.
And what goes into pulling together that contingency plan? What should basically the whole private sector be doing at this point in anticipation of what's coming down the road?
So I think you have to begin by thinking about what kinds of contracts you enter into that are most vulnerable to be recharacterized as swaps. I mean, first off, let me say, for almost anyone, they should think about any kind of financial contract or any kind of contract. Get it signed up before July 16th. I mean, get it signed up before the law goes into effect. But if you have business that goes on after that date, and there's going to be legal uncertainty in the United States, one possibility is, should you be thinking about moving that activity outside the United States? That's something that you don't want to advise U.S. clients when you're a U.S. lawyer, but that's something that needs to be considered. Another thing that you might think about doing is, if you enter into contracts, getting a right to terminate them, getting a right to assign them to one of your affiliates. You don't know what the law will end up being, and you have to just deal with those kinds of contingencies.
I want to jump out and talk about this issue on a global perspective. It's easy oftentimes to look at this as a national problem, but we have an international financial system at play here. Derivatives are used throughout the world. They're in Asia, Europe, the United States. People have been talking about the need to harmonize our rules and regulations. As we were speaking previously, we're having a little bit of difficulty regulating our domestic market. What should go into play when we look at this from a global perspective?
Well, to be honest, I think...
Is it possible, I guess, is the first question.
It is possible, but that really isn't the concern on the table for us as Americans. I think the concern for us on the table needs to be developing as good a system of regulation as we can have. And I think if we were to develop a good system of regulation, then we can hold it up as a model. But we're not at that point right now. I think we're at the point now where what we have is a model of uncertainty. And uncertainty is deadly to business, it's deadly to the economy.
Right. I want to pick up on that notion of uncertainty. We've seen a lot of, frankly, scary quotes in the press saying that the next financial crisis in the United States is probably going to emanate out of derivatives. Is that a realistic concern?
I think it's sort of a silly quote, to be honest. I don't know who to attribute it to. But I think most financial crises in some ways come out of the same thing, which is they come out of easy credit. There gets to be huge excitement about something in the economy, whether it's tulips or the internet or something else, and people lend money more and more easily, and they bid up the value of whatever it is, and then the value crashes. So the notion that there's something unique about derivatives, I find sort of eccentric and kind of misses the point of economic history, which is crashes happen when it's too easy to borrow money.
So what level of regulation, going back to before Dodd-Frank, what level of regulation should we have? Should we have any at this point, or?
Oh, absolutely. I think you need to have good capital regulation. But to focus on derivatives as a particular type of credit, I just think is mistaken. As we go and look back at what happened, obviously you had very high levels of lending in the mortgage market. So to some extent it's simply odd that we're deciding to pick out a very particular corner of the market and focus blame on it. And I suspect part of that is because we don't want to look at the larger systemic issues of the way the credit markets work.
So it sounds like when looking at the Dodd-Frank issues that we just spoke about, the government has a lot on its plate. How are they doing in terms of meeting the challenges logistically? And we were talking a little bit about staffing before. Where are their staffing needs? Do they have enough horses to carry this out?
In fairness to the regulators, there aren't enough horses in Texas to carry this out. It simply can't be done, no matter how many people you have within the time frame. Having said that, no, there's not enough people to write the regs. There's not enough people to enforce them. And oddly enough, you get this phenomenon where the more rules you write, the more business needs to hire your lawyers away. So you have an incredibly complicated set of rules which you're trying to write. Now business needs the lawyers that have written those rules. So no, there aren't enough staff to write them. But it's not just lawyers. For example, there's not enough compliance people. There's not enough technology people. Dodd-Frank calls for an amazing amount of technology, of reporting back and forth, both within the company, between companies, from the company to the government. There just isn't enough IT in the United States to implement this.
Right. Tough stuff. Set a high bar for achievement, and oftentimes it's hard to meet that.
Yes, and we're certainly not going to make it by July 16th.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there and see how it goes. Steve, I want to thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks very much for having me.
That's Steve Lofchie. He's a partner at Cadwalader based here in New York City. If you'd like to learn more about the issues we just discussed, go check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Lee Pacchia. Thanks for watching.